The dust rose in pale clouds behind Elias's boots. Each step sent up another breath of dry earth, fine as powder, coating his worn jeans and settling into the creases of his weathered hands. The sun hung low and merciless over the hill country, turning the horizon into a shimmering line where earth met sky in waves of heat. 5 miles stretched between him and home. 5 miles he'd walked before, but never quite like this. Never quite this defeated. His truck had given its final rattle that morning in the parking lot behind Jensen's feed store, the engine seizing with a sound like breaking bones. Elias had stood there for a long moment, keys still in hand, understanding with the clarity of exhaustion that he had no money for a tow, no money for repairs, no money for anything except the bag of chicken feed he'd charged to an account, already 3 months overdue. So he walked. The road cut through land that had once been prosperous. Fields that used to grow wheat and corn now sat fallow, overtaken by thistle and wild grass. Elias knew every farm along this stretch, knew the families who'd given up and moved to the city, the ones who'd sold to developers, the ones who'd simply vanished one winter and never came back. The hill country was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way, but beauty didn't pay bills or bring rain when the sky stayed empty for months. Elias Marsh was 47 years old and looked 60. 3 years of drought had carved lines into his face like canyons, and the loss of his wife to pneumonia the previous winter had hollowed something vital from his chest. His farm, 32 acres of stubborn, rocky soil, was all he had left, and he was losing that too, inch by inch, season by season. The county assessor's letter sat folded in his back pocket. Final notice. 30 days. He shifted the feed bag higher on his shoulder and kept walking. That's when he saw it. A shape beside the road, small and motionless near the dry ditch where runoff used to flow before the drought turned creeks to dust. At first, Elias thought it was a dog, some stray dumped by passing travelers who didn't want the burden anymore. But as he drew closer, the shape resolved into something else. A foal, maybe 4 months old, though it was hard to tell through the neglect. The young horse stood on legs that trembled with weakness, its head hanging so low that its muzzle nearly touched the ground. Ribs protruded through hide stretched tight as canvas, each bone visible like rungs on a ladder. Its coat was matted with mud and burrs, caked so thick that the original color was impossible to determine. One ear hung at an odd angle, possibly broken, and flies gathered at the corners of its eyes. Elias barely had enough resources to save himself, let alone a dying animal. But real quick, before we see what decision he makes, if you love stories about compassion and unexpected miracles, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss the rest of the story. Now, let's see if the little foal was still breathing. Elias stopped walking. The foal didn't move, didn't acknowledge his presence, just stood there in the failing light, a picture of complete surrender. "Go on," Elias said, his voice rough from disuse. "Get out of here." Nothing. The foal remained motionless. Elias waved his free arm. "Go! I got nothing for you. Move along." Still nothing. He felt anger rise in his throat, not at the animal, but at whoever had done this, whoever had taken something young and helpless and left it to die slowly by the roadside. People could be cruel in casual, thoughtless ways. He knew that, had learned it over and over these past few years. "I can't help you," Elias said, softer now. "I can barely help myself." He turned and resumed walking, his boots kicking up more dust, the feed bag heavy on his shoulder. The sun slipped lower. Shadows stretched long across the road. Behind him, a sound. Click-clack. Click-clack. Tiny hooves on pavement. Elias stopped, closed his eyes, counted to 5. When he turned around, the foal stood 20 feet back, its head still low, but its legs moving, following. "No," Elias said firmly. "You can't follow me. Go find someone else, someone who can actually feed you." He walked faster. The clicking followed, struggling to keep pace. Elias broke into a jog, the feed bag bouncing against his back. He made it 50 yards before he had to stop, his lungs burning, his bad knee screaming. He bent double, hands on his thighs, gasping. The clicking stopped behind him. When Elias straightened and turned, the foal stood there, swaying slightly, its dark eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. There was something in that gaze, not just desperation, but intelligence, awareness, a question being asked without words. Will you leave me too? Elias thought of his wife, Helen, and the way she used to rescue every broken thing that crossed their path. Birds with damaged wings, stray cats, field mice the barn cats had mauled. She'd nursed them all with gentle hands and soft words, telling Elias that everything deserved a chance, even the small and broken things, especially the small and broken things. You're going to die anyway, Elias told the foal, but his voice had lost its conviction. I can't save you. I don't have enough to save myself. The foal took one wobbling step forward, then another. Elias felt something crack inside his chest. God damn it, he whispered. He waited while the foal caught up, its tiny hooves clicking on the pavement, its breathing labored and wet. When it reached him, it stopped and simply stood there, waiting. Elias looked at the bag of chicken feed on his shoulder, looked at the foal, looked at the 2 remaining miles to his farm. All right, he said quietly. All right, come on then. They walked together as the sun set, man and foal, both moving slowly, both struggling. Elias matched his pace to the animal's halting steps, stopping when it needed to rest, speaking low words of encouragement when it seemed ready to quit. Not much farther now, just a little more. You can make it. Whether he was talking to the foal or himself, Elias couldn't say. The barn was dark and smelled of old hay and silence. Elias led the foal inside and settled it in the empty stall where his last horse had died 2 years ago. He filled a bucket with water from the hand pump and set it down. The foal drank with desperate gulping sounds, and Elias had to pull the bucket away before it made itself sick. Easy, you'll get more. Just wait a bit. He stood in the barn's doorway as night fell, watching the foal through the slats of the stall. It had collapsed onto the straw, its sides heaving, its eyes half closed. Elias tried to calculate how much food he had, how much he'd need to keep himself alive through winter, whether there was any way to stretch what little he had to include another mouth. The math didn't work, but then the math hadn't worked in 3 years, and he was still here. In the house, Elias cooked oatmeal on the wood stove, plain oatmeal with water, no milk, no sugar, nothing extra. He split it into 2 bowls, one for him and one for the foal. He carried the second bowl back to the barn and set it down in the stall. Don't know if you can eat this, he said, but it's what I got. The foal lifted its head and sniffed the bowl. Then, slowly, it began to eat. Elias sat on an overturned bucket and ate his own portion, watching the animal. In the lamplight, the foal looked even worse. Every bone visible, every rib countable, the matted coat hanging in clumps. He'd need to treat those sores, trim those overgrown hooves, do something about the parasites that were surely eating the animal from inside. All things that cost money he didn't have. You need a name, Elias said after a while. Can't just call you horse or foal. The animal's good ear swiveled toward his voice. What about Pip? The name came from nowhere, felt right immediately, small, unassuming, fitting for a creature this size. Yeah, Pip. That works. Pip finished the oatmeal and looked at Elias with those dark, intelligent eyes. Don't get used to this, Elias warned. I don't know how long I can keep it up. But he came back the next morning with more oatmeal, and the morning after that. He brought water multiple times a day, carrying buckets from the pump until his shoulders ached. He used an old wire brush to work at the matted coat, spending hours each evening in the barn, talking to Pip, while he carefully removed burrs and dried mud. Had a wife once, Elias said one night, working a particularly stubborn tangle. Helen. She would have loved you. She had a soft spot for things that needed help. Drove me crazy sometimes, but I loved her for it. Pip stood patiently under his hands, the trembling in the young horse's legs gradually lessening. She died last winter. Pneumonia. I couldn't afford the medicine. That might have saved her. By the time I scraped together enough money, it was too late. Elias's hands paused. I think about that every day. How if I'd been a better farmer, a smarter man? I might have had the money when it mattered. The barn was quiet except for the sound of the brush moving through hair. Maybe that's why I couldn't leave you on that road. Already failed one life I should have saved. couldn't stand to fail another. The days turned into weeks. Word spread through the valley the way news always did in rural places, through casual mentions at the feed store, observations shouted between passing trucks, gossip shared over fences. Elias saw the neighbors' reactions in their faces when they drove past his property. George Hendricks slowed his pickup to a crawl, staring at Pip in the small paddock Elias had rigged with old wire and fence posts. He rolled down his window and shouted across the distance. "That's what you're spending your time on? That bag of bones? You're crazier than I thought, Marsh." Ruth Campbell was less direct, but more cutting. She stopped by with a casserole she claimed was extra, though Elias knew she'd made it specifically to come snoop. "I heard you took in a stray horse," she said, her eyes scanning the property. "Lord knows why. Thing looks half dead. Most merciful thing would be to put it down before winter." "Maybe," Elias said, not inviting her inside. "You know people are talking, saying you've lost your grip on reality. A man who can't afford to fix his own truck, feeding a worthless animal." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Just thought you should know what folks are saying." After she left, Elias stood on his porch and looked at Pip, who was grazing on the sparse grass in the paddock. The foal had put on a little weight. Not much, but enough that the ribs weren't quite so prominent. The worst of the sores had healed. The trembling had stopped. "Let them talk," Elias said to the empty air. Each evening, he brushed Pip's coat, and each evening, more of the matted hair came away. What emerged underneath puzzled him. The coat wasn't brown or black like he'd expected. It was white, pure, snowy white. And as more of the coat shed out, Elias began to notice something else. Spots. Perfectly round black spots scattered across the white base coat like someone had painted them there. The pattern was striking, unusual, unlike any horse coloring he'd seen in 47 years of living in ranch country. "What are you?" Elias asked one night, running his hand over Pip's newly revealed coat. "Where'd you come from?" Pip nuzzled his pocket, looking for the small pieces of carrot Elias had started bringing when he could afford them. "You're something special, aren't you? That's why someone wanted to get rid of you. People don't like things they don't understand." The autumn deepened into early winter. The first frost came and coated the ground in white that looked like Pip's coat. Elias burned the last of his firewood and started burning fence posts from sections of fence he no longer needed. He sold his television, his wife's sewing machine, anything with value, just to buy enough food to keep himself and Pip alive. The county assessor's deadline came and went. Elias expected the sheriff to arrive any day with eviction papers, but he kept feeding Pip, kept brushing the young horse's coat, kept talking to him in the quiet barn while darkness gathered outside. "I think Helen would be proud," Elias said one cold evening, his breath fogging in the air. "Or maybe she'd say I'm a fool. Hard to know. She was practical, but she had a big heart. Somehow she balanced both. I never learned that trick." Pip had grown. The starving foal had transformed into something remarkable, taller, stronger, with a grace in his movements that suggested good breeding, hidden under all that earlier suffering. The leopard spot pattern had fully emerged, each spot perfectly round and distributed across the white coat, in a pattern that looked almost mathematical. Neighbors stopped laughing and started staring. "That's an unusual horse," George Hendricks admitted one afternoon, his tone grudging. "Ain't never seen markings like that." "Me neither," Elias agreed. "You figure out where he came from?" "Nope." "Might be worth something, a horse that pretty." Elias didn't respond. Worth was a complicated concept. How did you measure the value of something that had given you a reason to get up in the morning, that had filled the silence in a house too empty without Helen's voice? "Not interested in selling," Elias said. George drove away shaking his head. Winter arrived in earnest. Snow fell, not the pretty Christmas card kind, but the heavy, wet snow that collapsed roofs and isolated farms. Elias burned his dining table for warmth. He ate once a day so Pip could eat twice. He lost weight he couldn't afford to lose, but Pip grew stronger, more beautiful, more vital. And then, on a gray afternoon, when snow was falling and the world felt reduced to just the farm and the sky, a luxury car turned into Elias's driveway. The car was black and gleaming and completely out of place. Elias watched from the window as it navigated the rutted driveway carefully, its low clearance scraping once on a frozen pothole, It came to a stop near the house, and a man emerged wearing a wool coat that probably cost more than Elias's entire annual income. The man looked around with the expression of someone who'd taken a seriously wrong turn. Elias opened the door before the stranger could knock. "Help you?" "I'm terribly sorry to bother you," the man said, his accent polished and unfamiliar. "My GPS seems to have failed, and I'm quite lost. I'm trying to reach Riverside Estates. Would you happen to know?" He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes had found Pip, who stood in the paddock, his white coat stark against the gray sky, his black spots standing out like ink stains on snow. The color drained from the stranger's face. "My God," he whispered. Without another word to Elias, the man walked toward the paddock, his expensive shoes sinking into the mud and snow. He moved like someone in a trance, his eyes never leaving Pip. Elias followed, confused and slightly annoyed. "Sir, that's my horse. You can't just— Where did you get him?" The man's voice was sharp now, urgent. "Please, where did you get this horse?" "Found him on the roadside, back in September. Why?" The man reached the fence and stood staring at Pip with an intensity that made Elias uncomfortable. Pip, curious, walked over to investigate the stranger. "May I touch him?" the man asked, his voice trembling. "I guess." The man extended his hand carefully, and Pip sniffed it, then allowed the touch. The stranger's hands moved with professional certainty, checking Pip's face, his legs, his hooves. He examined the skin around Pip's eyes, the texture of his coat, the pattern of the spots. Then he found something, a small mark behind Pip's left ear, barely visible under the hair. The man's breathing became ragged. "Do you have any idea what you have here?" He turned to Elias, his eyes bright with something between excitement and grief. "A horse I saved from dying." "No, not just a horse." The man pulled out his phone with shaking hands. "This is a nabstrupper, a purebred Danish nabstrupper. Do you know what that means?" Elias shook his head. "It's one of the rarest breeds in the world. They were favorites of European royalty. The spotted coat is a genetic trait carefully preserved for centuries." He showed Elias pictures on his phone, horses that looked remarkably like Pip, their coats bearing the same leopard spot pattern. "I breed nabstruppers," the man continued, speaking faster now. "It's my family's business, has been for 6 generations. 3 months ago, there was a stable fire at Riverside Estates. We lost several horses, including a young foal from our most valuable bloodline. We searched everywhere, but we assumed he'd died in the confusion." He turned back to Pip, his voice breaking. "This mark behind his ear. It's how we identify our horses. This is Paladin's song. This is our lost foal." Elias felt the ground shift beneath his feet. That can't be right. He was abandoned on a roadside, starving. Someone probably found him after the fire, didn't know what they had, got rid of him when he became too much trouble. The man pulled out a checkbook. "Mr. Marsh, Elias Marsh. Mr. Marsh, I need to buy this horse back. Name your price. He's not for sale. You don't understand. This foal's bloodline goes back 200 years. His sire is one of the most valuable breeding stallions in North America. His potential offspring," the man wrote quickly. "I'm prepared to offer you $100,000. Right now, this check will clear immediately." He held out the check. Elias stared at the numbers. $100,000. More money than he'd seen in his entire life. Enough to save his farm, pay his debts, live comfortably for years. He looked at Pip, who had wandered back over and was nuzzling Elias's pocket, looking for treats. The foal who'd followed him home when both of them had nothing, who'd given him a reason to keep going through the darkest winter of his life, who'd trusted him when the world had given up on both of them. "He followed me home when he had nothing," Elias said quietly. "I'm not sending him away now that he has everything. Mr. Marsh, please be reasonable. That's enough money to what? Buy back my soul?" Elias's voice was gentle but firm. "I know what you see when you look at him. You see bloodlines and breeding potential and money. I see the reason I'm still alive. I see the thing that kept me from giving up when I had nothing left." He handed the check back. "My wife used to say that some things are worth more than money. I never really understood what she meant until now. Pip's not for sale, not for 100,000, not for 1 million. The man stared at him for a long moment, Then, slowly, he nodded. I understand. More than you might think. He pulled out a business card. If you ever change your mind, or if you need anything, veterinary care, feed, anything at all, you call me. That bloodline is precious, but so is what you've done for him. After the man left, Elias stood in the snowy paddock with Pip, his hand resting on the young horse's neck. Paladin's song, he said, testing the name. That what you were supposed to be called? Pip nuzzled his shoulder. I like Pip better. Fits who you really are. Not some fancy breeding machine. Just a horse who needed someone to care whether he lived or died. The snow fell harder, coating both of them in white. In the distance, Elias could see lights coming on in neighbor houses, smoke rising from chimneys. The world continuing its ordinary rhythms, unaware that something extraordinary had happened in this small, struggling farm. Elias thought about the check he'd refused, thought about the warm house it could have bought, the full stomach, the security. Then he looked at Pip, healthy and strong and beautiful in the falling snow, and knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice. Some things couldn't be bought or sold. Some bonds couldn't be measured in money. He'd learned that from Helen, forgotten it in his grief, and rediscovered it in the dark eyes of a starving foal who'd refused to give up. Come on, Elias said, leading Pip toward the barn. Let's get you inside where it's warm. They walked through the snow together, man and horse, both of them survivors, both of them proof that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones we almost leave behind on dusty roadsides. The barn door closed against the winter night, and inside, in the warm glow of lantern light, Elias brushed Pip's coat one more time before bed, his hands moving in the rhythm that had become ritual, his voice soft with the stories he told, stories about Helen, about the farm as it used to be, about hope that persisted even when logic said to quit. And Pip listened, the way he always did, his spotted coat gleaming, his dark eyes warm with trust. Outside, the snow continued falling, covering the struggling farm in white, making everything clean and new and possible again. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The bills wouldn't disappear. The farm wouldn't magically prosper. Winter would still be hard. But tonight, in a barn that smelled of hay and horse and second chances, Elias Marsh was wealthy beyond measure. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.